back to the latest episode of Gina's Gems. Returning today is Senior Consultant Angela Eskandar. Angela shared some gems last year on return to work opportunities and how we help support both our clients and vendor partners. She's back today to dive a little deeper and share her thoughts on building formal return to work policies. Hi, Angela.
Hi, Gina. Thanks for having me for round two.
Thanks for coming back to do another gem. So let's expand on your last episode, which focused on strategies that could be employed in the absence of a formal program. But first, maybe you can start with defining return to work and clarify what we're talking about when we say return to work.
Sure. So return to work in this reference is not used to talk about employer return to work to office procedures following the COVID-19 pandemic or public health emergencies. Our discussion today is going to be focused on processes in place to keep people at work and to return people from work from a disabling event. So the value of keeping people at work and getting them back to work as soon as possible is the foundation of any return to work program. So you probably remember in our first episode, we talked about the value of having an employee stay connected to the workplace when they were out. So from a return to work hierarchy perspective, the success rate is greater when an employee can return to their own employer, ideally in the same job or similar capacity. It can expedite or aid in their recovery. And typically, most people find value and meaning in their work, and it fosters social and professional interactions. On the flip side, it's also very beneficial for the employer to have a resource returning that's familiar with their business procedures, products, or services, and has already demonstrated a strong cultural fit within the company. And this also promotes greater productivity, minimizes the cost associated with any retraining, overtime, or engagement of temporary workers that may have been required.
Great. Thank you for that level set. And so when you're advising a client on designing a return to work policy, what do you advise or what insights can you offer?
Yeah, and we could have a whole episode just talking about this, right? But it's really 5 main components. So establishing buy-in from the leadership or top level down to really develop a compelling case to support the program. It's really important to think about the objective of the program. So what is the most meaningful metric to leadership? And that's going to be different for every organization and every industry. Are there certain key performance indicators or productivity metrics or lost work days tracking that are most impacted typically by an employee's absence? Strong understanding of how these are measured is very important so that the team that's working on this can really develop a realistic cost-benefit analysis that can be laid out. So the second part is the development of the formal policy or process. So typically this does include the formation of a cross-functional team that could involve people from occupational health and safety, benefits, operations, legal, payroll, and there's usually a coordinator or quarterback on site that helps to coordinate all of this. Obviously, in this phase, it's very important to develop the policy itself and to ensure that the policy cares for outlining the specific procedures, the eligibility criteria, how this will flow, coordinating with internal stakeholders and potentially vendors as well, and establishing the detail around what the trigger points will be to identify candidates for the program, and what are going to be the logistics of the system in place to track progress through the program. The policy should also care for how return to work activity impacts other company or statutory benefit programs as well. And then from a third perspective, the program is really only going to be as successful as the launch. So socializing it, right? And ensuring that it's not just widespread awareness that the program has been launched, but also a deep understanding of the program, its value, what is the company's philosophy around this, and who the owner or the contact person is. So engaging corporate communications team for an initial communication, and then ensuring that the policies and programs are housed somewhere that are accessible for everybody. The fourth component is training, right? So you've communicated it, and so training internal stakeholders and vendors on how the process will work. So training should include reminders, obviously, of what all the key stakeholders need to do in the process, but it's also important to encourage a mindset shift as well. So it's beyond adhering to the process. It's helpful for all the stakeholders to continuously think about this and to think about how they can be mindful of implementing this. And this does involve sometimes thinking outside the box in terms of return to work opportunities that might not be within their current job. And then tracking and measuring this, establishing a reporting system that quantifies the impact of the program is really going to be a key component to telling the story and providing insight if aspects of the program aren't working, or if something needs to be reevaluated. Maybe it's not working for all locations, but it's working really well within one department.
Got it. Yeah, thank you. Those are really helpful. So what would you say are the things for employers to consider, and how can their existing vendors help?
So thinking about what opportunities exist that most closely align with the candidate's regular work and job location is really the first step. So if we think about what we discussed in the first episode, which I'm sure everybody remembers, when we discussed the importance of disability claim managers, whether that's on the vendor side or through internal resources, having accurate and comprehensive job descriptions is really where this becomes really important. Because if there is an understanding of the job requirements and the person's current functionality, the identification of a return to work candidate comes pretty easily. So we would expect if employers have an outsourced disability program, that vendor partners should be looking for these return to work opportunities within the medical information that they receive. We've had good success having weekly roundtables with the vendors and the client to take a look at these cases. And then there's really two areas of focus in terms of returning people in a time-limited capacity. And the first and more ideal one is in a modified capacity. So returning to their own position, but maybe with a graduated schedule, 4 hours this week, 6 hours next week, and then 8 hours the following week. Or maybe they're capable of working full-time, but they have an inability to perform all the tasks. The second part of that is kind of looking at, if that's not possible for various reasons, are there transitional return to work opportunities? So finding opportunities outside of the job or outside of the department. And this is a deeper level of coordination within the employer. And this is where that cross-functional team really becomes very important. So looking at where within the organization, maybe the employer has work that's currently being done by temporary resources, or where they have considerable overtime to cover an absence. That's a good place to start. And sometimes there is some red tape because people returning in a different capacity might be under a different business unit or a different cost center. So there are considerations, and this is why it's important to have a formal program established so that there's good partnership across business units. A lot of times with transitional duty, it becomes more complex too. If people have specific jobs, let's say that require driving or operating heavy machinery that require a full duty clearance, sometimes that becomes a little more tricky, but we have seen, I know in my prior life working on the employer side, we had good success with a courier or somebody that drove, working more in scheduling and dispatching. So that was a success story. So before we close out, Gina, I do think I would be remiss while we're talking about return to work programs to not also say that the stay at work arm of a return to work program, so intervening before somebody actually has a disability event, but they're trending towards a disability event, that the stay at work arm of the program is equally as important from an ergonomic and workstation modification perspective.
Well, this is all really awesome information, and I love your insights. And I've said this to you before, but your passion for this topic is so evident. And I really appreciate the perspective that you bring, given your experience, as you mentioned, working on both the carrier and the large employer side, and now, lucky for us, on the consulting side. So thank you for joining me today, for coming back and sharing your thoughts and insights. For those of you watching, if you're interested in learning more about how we assist our clients with return to work opportunities, reach out to me or Angela, and we hope to see you back here in a few weeks for our next gem. Thanks, Angela.
Thanks, Gina.